Hey guys, Miss Michaela here from the Youth Services Department of the Downtown Huntsville Public Library, and today I am joined by Miss Adrienne, manager of the new North Huntsville Public Library, soon to be opening in spring. Yay! So for today, Adrienne is joining me to discuss our picks for Black History Month. We are actually going to be dividing up tasks. So first we're going to be talking about our adult books, and then we're both going to be talking about our kids' selections. So, Adrienne, if you would like to get us started with your adult books, and then I'll talk about mine.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, because I'm not used to stuff like this. So this has been an honor already. But to share a couple books that are kind of very important to me, I'll start with this one. So it's called When They Call You a Terrorist. This is by Patrisse Khan-Cullors, and I will set this here actually. And basically with this book, I was inspired to read it because at the time, I think the trial of the officer that was charged with Philando Castile's situation, that happened, he was found not guilty. And essentially, I really wanted to kind of understand a little bit more about the movement of Black Lives Matter. And I thought it was kind of important to at least get the perspective. And so when this book came out, I was like, well, this is my chance to read it from their perspective. And this is someone, the author is one of the co-founders of that movement. And so, it's her memoir, and it basically just tells of her events of her life and what has inspired her and what caused her to take action and to organize and to want to create something that can bring awareness to situations dealing with the police that involve people of color. So, but I do recommend it. My next book here is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And actually, this book, the physical copy of the book, or the printed copy, actually has a different color or different type of book cover.
Yeah, I didn't recognize it at all when you
I know, right? It's usually like kind of like an orange background, somewhat somewhere on the same plane as this. But anyways, and it has Henrietta's image on the front, so it's a really nice book. But anyways, it's a good story. This book, actually, I read this about 10 years ago. It was the start of me actually reading nonfiction books, because nonfiction books were not my thing.
Yeah, that's kind of what started me reading nonfiction when we did it for that book club. Mm-hmm. And now that you're saying how long ago it was, I'm feeling really old now. So
yeah, it was about
thank you.
10 years ago. sorry.
It's cool.
For bringing that up.
But it's gonna come up.
But this book really did help me start to appreciate nonfiction, and it's truly a story within a story. The author, it tells of her journey, in addition to the journey of who she was looking for, which was Henrietta Lacks and her family. And it's this story, when they delve more into Henrietta's story, it becomes a story of ethics and race and medicine, secrets. Also, it connects the dark history of experimentation with African Americans and bioethics and just everything. And so to kind of I did take some notes for this one because I did want to make sure I described it well. So in 1951, basically Henrietta, she discovered a knot on her abdomen area. And so she went to the doctor, and it turned out to be a form of cervical cancer. And so, she received treatment, and at the time, it seemed rather primitive,
Yes, it did.
Very. And, but unknowingly to Henrietta, the hospital took her cell tissue, which was commonplace at the time. So they didn't really have to ask if you were a cancer patient. And so, but also what they've noticed is with her cell tissue, that her cells, typically they would, with human cells, they would die off when they do experiments and things like that. But hers actually became immortal, if you will, and that's where that word immortal comes in. So unfortunately, Henrietta did, she did succumb to the disease, and she left behind 5 children and a husband, and she was only 31. And her family had no idea that the doctors took her cells or that some of her cells were even still alive. And so, if there is a silver lining in all of this, Henrietta's cells allowed many medical breakthroughs. So, developing the polio vaccine, gene mapping. Her cells also was used to help develop the vaccine for HPV, development of in vitro fertilization. I mean, very, very groundbreaking things. So that concludes my adult section here.
Okay. So I'm going to try to mirror your setup because I also brought an audiobook. It'll make my brain feel better if I see him going we'll just go with it. All right. So, and this is also my more serious book. It's called Black on Both Sides, A Racial History of Trans Identity. It's by C.Riely Snorton. C.Riely Snorton. And it basically talks about how movements for trans rights and also the struggles of trans people often mirrors the struggles of African Americans and also the movement for their rights. So I noticed, like, more this year than in previous years, the outcry for trans rights because they were being oppressed so very much, and it was just, coming to a fore, basically. So it was interesting to read this book, and I do like to include queer books as much as I can whenever I do a book talk. So I'm glad that this was available through the library. I borrowed it from the Cavalry Library, actually, but this gives an interesting history of medical experimentation as well that occurred and how it relates to discussions of gender today. So if you are interested in gender history and queer history and also Black history, this book has it all. It is not a very upbeat read. It's a little bit clinical and very historical. So if you're wanting something a little more funny, but also still pretty serious, as you can tell by the title, What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker by Damon Young is a collection of essays by Damon Young, who was also on, what was his podcast? I think it was like Geniuses. I'll have to look it up. No, I don't remember suddenly because we're recording. But I enjoyed this book because there was a bit of humor mixed in with his discussion of what it's like to grow up in a poor Black community and the struggles of trying to relate to classmates when his parents moved him into like a more affluent community school, and always struggling with what is his Blackness, because he's a few years older than me, and when we were kids, the word blurred did not exist. So if you were a Black nerd, you were just a weirdo.
Yeah, that's fair.
But another thing, along with kind of describing the humor that goes along with the trauma that kind of comes with being Black, one of the opening stories that he talks about is the feeling that you get when an officer or a cop car is following you while you're driving. And it's kind of an intense feeling that I've had several times over the years. And he talks about going through the motions of noticing that the police officer is behind him, making sure that his seatbelt is on, making sure that both hands are on the wheel and visible, and going so far as to turn on Taylor Swift to be as non-threatening as possible. And it was kind of traumatic to see that because those are crazy steps to have to go through to guarantee your safety, but it's what we do. Yeah. And it was nice to hear someone else describing that experience and trying to see the humor in it, because you have to try to see the humor in it to keep going. So I listened to the audiobook of this. He reads it himself, and I really liked his voice, but I really enjoyed his storytelling as well. And he's very honest when he comes to talking about his pitfalls and his own shortcomings, and his coming into understanding the importance of feminism and supporting women, and especially Black women. But I recommend this book. Awesome. Shall we move in to our kids' picks?
Yeah. And before we do that, too, I do want to point out this book also is in audio as well. And that's how I listened to it. That's how I read it. I not read, like in quotes, but read it. I did read it. I promise. But yeah, I think it does make a difference, though. Yeah. You pointed out, like, when you hear the author reading their own story, I think sometimes it's more personal, and sometimes it can't be duplicated with just hearing another reader read it. So.
Because it's their baby.
Yeah. You hear things, you hear more emotion and things like that. So, but yeah. Okay. The kids' books. So I have a couple here. Grandma's Purse, which is funny to me. When I first saw this title, I was like, you know what? This brings back the idea of how, like with my great-grandmother, it was kind of like a mystery what was in her purse. And so when she would tell me to get something out of it, I was like, oh, for real? I can? So I kind of thought it was like a magical thing or whatever when I was younger. So, but in this book, you do have a very stylish grandma. And, I love her hair in this book and her blue painted fingernails that she has. And she's coming to visit. And so they have like her and the child have such a nice journey together just because of the items in her purse. Sweet and touching, but yeah, it's very important, showing that family dynamic and things like that. So
I love the image on the back too.
Oh yeah, let me show the back. This is her doing her grandmother's hair with hairpins and everything else.
I do miss being able to do that with my own grandmother, like when I was little, because yeah, she would let us play with her hair sometimes. She's a very patient woman.
And this next book is called The King of Kindergarten. Oh, and I didn't say the author's name. So the author's name is Vanessa Brantley Newton for this book. And for this book, it's The King of Kindergarten by Derek Barnes. And, this is about a kid starting kindergarten. So as we all know, kindergarten is a big deal, right? And this book goes into, like, the child's first day of school. And, he's dressed himself. He's eating a pile of pancakes. He can't wait to meet new people, new friends. And so what I appreciate is how the child is so pumped up and so enthusiastic about his first day of kindergarten. And I feel like this book can help parents to, if you have a child that's starting kindergarten or starting school, or whenever we get to some sense of normalcy, it'll help kind of encourage the child to be okay with first day, and to, to encourage them to be excited and not be afraid. And so it's really great. It has great pictures, and it celebrates diversity too. So.
Awesome. Well, for my kids' picks, I'm going to start with the smaller book first. It's a biography about Gordon Parks, how the photographer captured black and white America. And it's written by Carol Boston Weatherford and illustrated by Jamie Kristoff. And just to show you a few of the pictures, it's done in a very realistic way. It's not very wordy, so it's appropriate for kindergarten level on up to probably first or second grade. But it talks about the life of Gordon Parks starting from when he's a kid, and, he was born in, I'm going to cheat and look. He was born in 1912. So as you can imagine, when he was growing up and going to school, his teachers were telling him all the service jobs he could do. And, the jobs that would be expected of a Black person to do. But he saw in himself, you know, the ability to create art and to tell a story through pictures, and he did just that. And he ended up telling the story of the Black American experience through his photography, and he brought attention to the differences in the lives of white Americans versus Black Americans. One of his primary models was Ella Washington, who cleaned cleaned several buildings, one of which he worked in. And he just followed her day to day through her life. He took pictures of the Black only and white only areas. And I think recently there was a show that was done in Mobile of his work. I'm not sure if it's still available. But if you go to the back where it does the About Gordon Parks section of the book, it actually shows you some of the famous pictures that he's taken. So you get to show your kids, you know, the picture book, the illustrations of what he did, as well as the actual photographs, and kind of bring that story to true life. So I enjoyed this book. It was really brief but informative, and again, appropriate for like pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, that sort of age range, and beautifully told. My last book is called All Boys Aren't Blue. It just came out in like 2019, and it's a memoir manifesto by George M. Johnson, in which he discusses what it's like to grow up being Black and queer. So I started with the queer book, and I'm ending with the queer book because, again, the connection between the movement for the rights for Black people and the rights for queer people, and how they're interconnected so much. And also it talks about how being Black and queer is kind of a double whammy. So you're, what's the word? You're discriminated against for being Black already, but on top of that, even within the Black community, you're usually discriminated against for being queer. So it's not all sad. There are some sweet, poignant moments in this book, and he does talk about how things are changing for the better. But one of the things that I appreciated about it was within the intro, he talks about how he was hesitant at first to write about this because there's the idea that sometimes the things that people want to discuss in books are too heavy for teens or kids to read about. But he realized, like, hey, if I'm living it, it's not too heavy to read about, because there's other kids that are living it too. And I really liked that honesty that he put in there. And I myself I do not identify as queer. My pronouns are she, her, and I have not had this struggle at all. But I know from my family that they would have been open and supportive, so I've never experienced what it's like to have or feel like my family would not accept me for this. So I find that it's important to incorporate these books into my own reading so that I can learn about someone else's experience. And this is the final book, and if you are interested in hearing more about Black voices, or queer Black voices in particular, the St. Louis Public Library is actually going to be doing a book talk about queer Black authors this month. February 23rd. It is a virtual event. The link to their event is going to be included in the description of this video. So if you're interested, please check it out. So thank you guys so much for joining us for this episode of Book Connection. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Bye. Stay safe.